Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation.
Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to another rousing episode of Pop Canada, the show where we take a look at how Canada attempts to stay relevant on and in the modern cultural landscape. Today with me is, as always, you know him, you love him, you listen to him as he speaks you off into that great night, Patrick. Hi, Patrick.
We're just doing the entire episode with odd Scottish or Irish accents, whichever one you started with.
I just get on a roll, man. And now we're going to be rolling back the clock to the early 2000s. So look out for that jet lag because you're just a kid. And you might be addicted because this episode is about Simple Plan.
For listeners who might not have heard the episode in which you decided to do this episode, what's the impetus behind doing this punk band from 2002?
So in our pre-episode ramblings, me and Patrick usually catch up, talk about what's been happening, any shows, whatever we've seen. And I talked about the new Velma show, which I don't like. I don't think
don't
it's
need
good.
to get into it, but it exists.
It exists. And I discussed the fact that I'm a big Scooby-Doo fan for a long time. And we were sort of joking, how would we do an episode of Scooby-Doo? And then we started recording. And about 10 minutes into the episode, I just burst out randomly, oh my God, we're going to do it on Simple Plan. Because Simple Plan recorded the theme for the What's New Scooby-Doo 2002 TV show. And they their songs were used in the live action Scooby-Doo movies. Yeah, they've got a bit of history with the Dooper, but we'll get into that later. First, we're just going to open...
But I'm curious, as a preemptive question, which you can kind of keep in mind, because I know nothing about Scooby-Doo, or I barely watched it, but why them? Do you feel like it works well with Scooby-Doo?
So Scooby-Doo has a long history of using these in the moment rock artists to record songs for their movies and TV shows. This isn't a new, Simple Plan isn't the first to do this. I want to say it started probably with, because Scooby-Doo's always had guest stars. Scooby-Doo's always been big on the guest stars ever since its second series, The New Adventures of Scooby-Doo. And then with the release of straight to VHS/DVD movies, starting with Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, they would get these big artists at the time to record a new single, based around that, a rock genre or whatever, something like that they would use in their chase scenes, their big set piece of the movie they would have. And so that sort of continues on for a while. And Simple Plan was the band that got What's New Scooby-Doo to the TV show.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's really indicative. It's almost a weird way to mark which artist was really big in a certain, if they performed a track for Scooby-Doo, because Scooby-Doo isn't afraid to date itself like a lot of other big IPs are. The Looney Tunes don't.
You also see that with. But also Looney Tunes is
because exactly Looney Tunes, themselves. Mickey Mouse, these things are immortal. Scooby-Doo is Scooby-Doo's we are always 2 steps away from being canceled again, so we're just gonna do what we need to do.
Yeah, but you feel, I feel like you could probably say the same thing about The Simpsons. Depending who the guest star is in that moment, you can see okay, this is. In 2015, they had Lady Gaga and whatever, and it was a terrible episode. But you can clearly tell,
it's an indicator that Lady Gaga is big at that time.
Yeah, exactly.
If you make it onto The Simpsons, you're big. If you do a track for Scooby-Doo, you're big.
You're bigger.
If you're playing for the Doober, but yeah, no, it's a legitimate indication. It's really fascinating way to look at the history of music, but Scooby-Doo has this weird tie to it in its own way. It's kind of really, and we'll get more into it as we get into today's episode. We'll talk a bit more about the Simple Plan Scooby-Doo, because there's more depth than to just recording the theme for some goddamn reason. But we're gonna start all the way back at the beginning.
So launch yourself back to 2000, early 2000s, Mac. Describe to me what you looked like. Like, did you have the flaming t-shirts and the baggy pants?
No, no, no. Early 2000s, I was still like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't have like the flaming t-shirts and all that. And instead I had, and I also, I've never been somebody who follows current music.
Enough.
Like if I hear a song, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I have a vague idea of the big artists. But if you ask me to say what are the top 40 songs at any given moment, I'm like, oh,
You absolute square.
yeah, literally. I would just listen to whatever music my mother put on the goddamn CDs,
Fair enough.
which most of the
That's
time
cool.
was a lot of Michel Fugain et Le Big Bazaar, or a lot of U2. And then when we moved to Bermuda, it was a lot of Jimmy Buffett.
Gotta get those margaritas, man.
Yo, it's wild. I don't like, my French isn't great, but I can almost sing Attention, Mesdames et Messieurs word for word
Without an accent.
without an accent at this point. And anyway, I've shocked my French friends doing it. I just start going and they're like, what the fuck? You don't speak French. I'm like, dude, this is a core memory. This shit is
You're the
embedded in my neurons.
you're the English Canadian version of ABBA. Have you ever heard them like speak English just
Yeah.
normally in an interview? It's terrible, right? Because they have a very thick accent and you can it's quite hard to understand them. But hearing them sing, you're like, oh, these are just regular Americans.
And we'll talk about language regarding Simple Plan as well, because there's some really important stuff because of where they come from. So, did you look like a edgy 2000s kid? Did you have like a chain on your wallet or something? Did you have like, were you emo? Did you have an emo phase?
Yes.
Oh my God. I want a picture of that.
After when we're talking about here, but I absolutely did. And during a way too long a part of my elementary school, I had like the baggy pants and skater shoes, even though I didn't do actually any skateboarding, and the chain wallet look. I absolutely 100% had that, and it was terrible.
Oh, no,
Oh,
I
and
looked like,
spiked hair with colors on them.
nice.
That was a thing that I had for way too long as well.
You wore like the long sleeve shirt underneath your t-shirt. That's what you're saying.
I was the stereotype.
I was the opposite stereotype. You know, in those music videos where like the punk kids are pushing back against the preppy kids?
Yeah.
I was more one of like the preppy.
Fair enough. But yeah. So tell me a bit about, because I know their music, but I know very little about like the behind the scenes of Simple Plan.
Well, so it's not like, they're not a band that has a very like complicated history, which I think is something that people can like gravitate towards. It's also why they were never like, their music was always relevant, but they themselves did not become recognizable figures, if that makes any sense.
Right. Yeah.
Because they didn't have these like big, even their like philanthropic pursuits were not huge multi-million-dollar things. It was always like, we're gonna raise $100,000 for this, we're gonna raise 100,000, like still doing their part, but not explosively, you know?
Which is pretty average, by the way, in like Quebec or even just provincial philanthropic things, right? You rarely see the $1 million raising.
And again, like in Quebec and Canada, we'll get back to that too. So the band was formed in 1990. Back in 1993, a couple of the members, lead vocalist Pierre Bouvier and drummer Chuck Como, were in a band called Reset, which obviously you haven't heard it, but it basically was famous because of the fact that multiple members of Simple Plan were on it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's retroactively well known.
Yeah. So, but the two of them left in 1998, and Como met up with some old high school friends, including guitarist Jeff Stinko and guitarist Sebastien Lefebvre.
Yep.
Yeah, he's like Lefebvre.
Generally, you don't pronounce the B, though. It would be Lefebvre.
Lefebvre. So yeah, Sebastien Lefebvre. And they were also in separate bands, but again, I guess they all decided to like pull out of those bands.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got together to form Simple Plan in the beginning in the year 1999. And then that's when they added the fifth member, like a little bit afterwards, David Desroussiers, who became one of their backing vocalists and bassist, which allowed some of the other members of the band to focus on just the guitar, just the lyrics, that sort of stuff.
Right. because the bass is the most simple thing that you can play.